A billionaire overheard a single mom cancel her son's birthday cake. What he did next changed their lives and melted millions of hearts. The afternoon sun filtered through the smudged windows of Sweetie's bakery as Diane Miller stood at the counter, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, but I need to cancel the birthday cake order for Saturday." Her fingers trembled as she clutched her purse, knuckles whitening with the effort of holding herself together. The bakery, with its warm scents of vanilla and cinnamon, had always been a place of joy for Diane, but today it felt like the sight of another defeat. "Cancel? But Ms. Miller, we've already started on the baseball design. Tommy's turning 8, right?" Nancy, the bakery owner, peered over her reading glasses with concern. She had known Diane since high school and had watched her struggle as a single mother since Tommy's father walked out 3 years ago. "I know, and I'm so sorry. Something came up with work, and Diane's voice cracked. She couldn't bring herself to say that her hours had been cut at the hospital where she worked as a nurse's aide, or that the choice had come down to the cake or the electricity bill. "I'll still pay the deposit. I know it's short notice." What neither woman noticed was the tall man in the corner booth, his attention caught by the quiet exchange. James Harrington had stopped at the small-town bakery on a whim while his driver filled up the car at the gas station across the street. Dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, he seemed out of place among the gingham curtains and faded linoleum. The tech billionaire was passing through on his way to a conference, his mind usually occupied with stock prices and acquisition deals. But something about the woman's posture, shoulders rounded forward as if bearing an invisible weight, made him listen more carefully. "Don't worry about the deposit, honey," Nancy said, reaching across the counter to squeeze Diane's hand. "You can use it another time. Is Tommy very disappointed?" "He doesn't know yet," Diane whispered, wiping quickly at her eyes. "I'll figure something out. Maybe cupcakes from the grocery store. I just hate to let him down again." James watched as she left the bakery, her head held high despite the obvious distress. Through the window, he saw her climb into an aging sedan, sit motionless for a moment, then rest her forehead against the steering wheel. "Tough situation?" James asked casually as Nancy approached to refill his coffee. "Oh, you have no idea," Nancy sighed, glancing toward the door. "Diane works harder than anyone I know. 2 jobs, raising that sweet boy alone. Tommy's been talking about this birthday party for months. Baseball theme, he's crazy about it. Keeps saying this is the year the Red Sox scouts will discover him," she added with a sad smile. "Diane's been saving up, but life keeps throwing curveballs." James nodded, his coffee forgotten as he gazed out the window. At 42, he had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. His charitable foundation donated millions each year, but it had been ages since he'd connected with the human impact of financial struggle. The foundation staff handled the details, he just signed the checks. "What kind of cake was it going to be?" he asked suddenly. "Baseball field design. Green frosting for the grass, white for the bases. Tommy's name on the pitcher's mound." Nancy's eyes brightened. "I was going to make little fondant players, too. That boy deserves something special." James pulled out his wallet. "I'd like to pay for the cake and whatever else would make a great party." Nancy stared at him, recognition slowly dawning. "You're—" "Just someone who remembers what it's like to look forward to a birthday," he interrupted with a gentle smile. "My mother worked 3 jobs. There were years when a cake was a luxury we couldn't afford." Within minutes, the plan expanded, not just the cake, but a complete party at the local baseball field. James made calls while Nancy contacted Diane's best friend, Kelly, to coordinate. By the time he left the bakery, James had set aside his conference plans for the weekend. Something about this situation had stirred memories he'd long buried beneath spreadsheets and board meetings. 3 days later, Tommy Miller woke up on his 8th birthday, expecting little more than his mother's traditional pancake breakfast. The past few months had been full of disappointments: baseball camp canceled, their planned move to a better apartment delayed, his mother's increasingly exhausted smiles. He'd overheard enough to understand that money was tight, though the concept remained abstract to his young mind. "Ready for your birthday surprise?" Diane asked, her eyes sparkling in a way Tommy hadn't seen in months. "Pancakes?" he guessed, already grateful for the small tradition. "Better. Get dressed. Baseball gear today." Tommy's heart raced as they drove toward the town's baseball field. He spotted balloons tied to the fence and a small gathering of people. "Mom, what's happening?" Diane simply smiled, emotion making it impossible to speak. When they parked, Tommy recognized his friends from school, his Little League teammates, and several adults from the neighborhood. "Surprise!" they shouted as he approached. The baseball field had been transformed. A tent housed a table laden with food and drinks. Baseball-themed decorations hung everywhere. Tommy's friends rushed forward, baseball mitts already on their hands. "We're having your party at a real baseball field," Diane explained, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. Someone very kind, wanted to make your birthday special." Tommy was speechless, his eyes wide as he took in the scene, especially the magnificent cake centerpiece, exactly like the one he'd described to his mother months ago while flipping through Nancy's cake catalog. What Tommy didn't immediately notice was the tall man standing off to the side, watching with an unexpected lump in his throat. James Harrington had spent billions on business deals without blinking, but the pure joy on this child's face affected him in ways he couldn't articulate. The day unfolded with impromptu baseball games, presents, and food. Local coaches volunteered to run drills with the kids. A professional photographer captured moments that would become cherished memories. Through it all, James remained in the background, speaking briefly with Diane to explain his impulse at the bakery. "I can't possibly thank you enough," Diane said, watching Tommy run the bases with abandon, his face flushed with excitement. "You don't need to," James replied simply. "Sometimes life deals unfair hands. I've been fortunate enough to receive more than my share of good cards. It's only right to redistribute the deck occasionally." As the afternoon light began to fade and children reluctantly headed home, Tommy approached James, whom he'd been eyeing curiously throughout the day. "Mom says you're the reason we had this amazing party," Tommy said, looking up at the billionaire with unabashed directness. "She says you're like a baseball scout, but for people who need help." James crouched down to meet the boy at eye level. "Your mom is the real hero. I just pitched in for one day. She's batting for you every single day." Tommy considered this with the seriousness only an 8-year-old can muster. Then, with the unpredictable impulse of childhood, he threw his arms around the billionaire's neck in a fierce hug. "This was the best day ever," he whispered. James froze, then carefully returned the embrace, something shifting in his chest, a wall crumbling that he hadn't even realized he'd built. As the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, none of them could have predicted how this chance encounter would change all their lives. The story was just beginning. The Monday following Tommy's birthday celebration, James Harrington sat in his executive suite overlooking the Boston skyline, unable to focus on the quarterly reports his assistant had prepared. His mind kept drifting back to the baseball field, to Tommy's uninhibited joy and Diane's grateful tears. Something had awakened in him, a recognition of purpose beyond profit margins and technological innovations. Mr. Harrington, his assistant Patricia, appeared at the door. "Your 10 o'clock was canceled, but there's something else that needs your attention." James nodded absently, still staring out the window. "Sir, are you all right? You've been distracted since you returned from your trip." James turned, regarding his efficient assistant of 7 years. Had he ever asked about her family, her aspirations beyond managing his calendar? "Patricia, do we have any programs that directly help working families? Not just donations to large charities, but something more personal." Patricia blinked in surprise. "The foundation handles our philanthropic work, but it's mostly large grants to established organizations, nothing specifically targeting individual families that I'm aware of." "Let's change that," James said decisively. "Set up a meeting with the foundation team and find out if we have contacts at Mercy Hospital in Riverdale." "Riverdale? That's nearly 2 hours from Boston." "I'm aware. It's important." What James couldn't explain, even to himself, was the persistent image of Diane's determined face as she'd tried to cancel that cake. There had been no self-pity, just quiet dignity in the face of impossible choices. It reminded him of his own mother, who had cleaned houses and waited tables to provide for him after his father's death, never complaining despite the exhaustion evident in her eyes. Meanwhile, in Riverdale, Diane was experiencing her own lingering effects from the birthday party. Tommy couldn't stop talking about Mr. James and the amazing day. His enthusiasm was infectious, but it also stirred uncomfortable feelings. While deeply grateful for the stranger's kindness, Diane prided herself on self-reliance. Accepting such generosity from a billionaire, however well-intentioned, had left her feeling both grateful and somewhat diminished. Mom, can we send Mr. James a thank you card? I made this in art class. Tommy held up a construction paper creation covered in glitter and baseball stickers. Diane smiled, ruffling his hair. That's thoughtful, honey, but I'm not sure how to reach him. Miss Nancy at the bakery might know. She talked to him a lot. The suggestion was reasonable, but Diane hesitated. The bakery had become a place of mixed emotions, the site of her humiliation and subsequent rescue. Later that week, Diane's supervisor at the hospital called her into the office. With her stomach in knots, Diane prepared for more bad news about reduced hours. Diane, I've received a rather unusual request, Dr. Winters began, her expression unreadable. The Harrington Foundation has approached the hospital about establishing a new nursing scholarship program. They specifically asked if we had staff interested in advancing their medical education. Diane stared blankly. That's wonderful for the hospital, but the foundation representative mentioned you by name. The room seemed to tilt. Me? There must be some mistake. No mistake. Apparently, Mr. Harrington himself requested that you be informed of this opportunity. Dr. Winters slid a folder across the desk, full tuition for an RN program plus a stipend for living expenses. They're calling it the Second Chance Scholarship. Diane's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Inside was an official letter from the Harrington Foundation, along with program details that seemed tailored specifically to her situation, classes scheduled around her existing work hours, childcare assistance, mentoring support. The generosity was overwhelming but also discomforting. Why her? I don't know what to say. Say you'll apply, Dr. Winters encouraged. You're one of our hardest workers, Diane. You deserve this chance. That evening, as Tommy completed his homework at the kitchen table of their small apartment, Diane paced, the scholarship papers spread before her. What's wrong, Mom? You keep walking back and forth like Mrs. Peterson's cat when it's hungry. Diane smiled despite her turmoil. Just thinking, buddy, about the papers. Is it bills again? His young face grew serious, displaying an awareness no 8-year-old should have about financial struggles. No, actually, it's something good. Potentially, but complicated. Tommy nodded sagely, like when the coach says you have great potential but complicated mechanics. Diane laughed, the tension breaking momentarily. Something like that. The next day, she found herself standing once again in Sweetie's bakery, this time with purpose rather than defeat. Nancy, I need to ask you something about Mr. Harrington. Nancy smiled knowingly. I was wondering when you'd come by. That man was quite taken with you and Tommy. Diane blushed. Not like that. He's established a scholarship at the hospital, and somehow my name was specifically mentioned. It feels, I don't know, targeted. I'm grateful but also confused. Nancy wiped her hands on her apron. He asked a lot of questions about you after you left that day. Not in a creepy way, she added hastily. He seemed genuinely concerned, said something about seeing his own mother in you. His mother, apparently she raised him alone, worked multiple jobs. He said watching you reminded him of what she went through. This revelation shifted something in Diane's perspective. Not charity then, but empathy born of shared experience despite the vast difference in their current circumstances. As Diane debated the scholarship offer over the following days, James was implementing broader changes inspired by his encounter with the Millers. The Harrington Foundation launched a new initiative focused on supporting working single parents, particularly those pursuing education in healthcare fields. The pilot program would begin in Riverdale before expanding nationally. 2 weeks after Tommy's birthday, Diane was startled by a knock at her apartment door. Opening it revealed Nancy from the bakery holding a large envelope. Special delivery, Nancy announced with a conspiratorial smile. Someone dropped this off for you. Inside was a brief note on expensive stationery. Mrs. Miller, I hope you'll consider the scholarship opportunity. It's not charity. It's investment in someone who clearly has the determination and heart that our healthcare system desperately needs. No strings attached, no obligations. Your decision entirely. Separately, Tommy left quite an impression on me. Enclosed is a season pass for the Red Sox home games. My driver can arrange transportation for any games you wish to attend. Again, no obligations, simply an opportunity if you choose to accept it. With respect and admiration, James Harrington. P.S. The baseball scout joke was the best I've heard in years. Diane sat heavily on the sofa, the note in one hand and the season tickets, which must have cost thousands, in the other. Well? Nancy prompted. He's either the most generous man alive or what? Diane shook her head. I don't know. Why us? There are thousands of struggling families. What makes us special? Nancy considered this. Maybe you're not special, no offense. Maybe you're just the one he happened to see. Sometimes being seen is enough. That night, after Tommy went to bed, Diane made her decision. She would accept the scholarship but decline the baseball tickets. Education was an investment in their future. The tickets felt too personal, too much like, she couldn't articulate what exactly, but something that crossed a boundary she wasn't comfortable breaching. She crafted a careful email to the foundation, accepting the scholarship with profound thanks, explaining her decision about the tickets, and attaching a photo of Tommy's thank you card. The response came within minutes despite the late hour. The scholarship is yours. Congratulations. As for the tickets, I understand your hesitation, but please reconsider, not for yourself, but for Tommy. I grew up without such opportunities and would have given anything for such experiences with my mother. The driver is professional and trustworthy. Perhaps one game as a trial. No ulterior motives, I assure you. J.H. Diane stared at her phone screen, conflicted emotions swirling. What exactly was happening here? Was this simply the whim of a bored billionaire or something more meaningful? And why did the distinction matter so much to her? The crack of the bat echoed through Fenway Park as the Red Sox slugger sent the ball soaring toward the green monster. Tommy leapt to his feet, nearly spilling his soda, his face alight with unbridled excitement. Mom, did you see that 3-run homer? He turned to Diane, his eyes wide with wonder. These seats are amazing, we can see everything. Diane nodded, smiling despite herself. After 3 weeks of polite refusal, she had finally relented to Tommy's pleas and James's persistent offers. Now sitting in premium box seats behind home plate, seats that would have cost more than a month's rent, she had to admit the experience was magical. Mr. Peterson at school won't believe I was this close, Tommy exclaimed, clutching his new Red Sox cap, a purchase Diane had allowed as a special treat. Can we take a picture to show him? As Diane raised her phone to capture Tommy's beaming face with the field behind him, a discreet cough from their left caught her attention. Excuse me, said an elegant older woman in a Red Sox jacket. Would you like me to take a photo of both of you together? That would be wonderful. Thank you, Diane replied, handing over her phone. The woman snapped several pictures, then returned the device with a warm smile. Your son is having quite the time. First baseball game, first professional game, Tommy answered before Diane could speak. We're here because Mr. James gave us tickets. He's a billionaire who helped when Mom had to cancel my birthday cake, and now Mom's going to be a real nurse because of his scholarship. Diane flushed with embarrassment at Tommy's artless explanation of their circumstances. Tommy, honey, we don't need to share our personal business. The woman's eyes crinkled with amusement. No need for embarrassment. James has always had a good eye for recognizing worthy investments. Diane's attention sharpened. You know Mr. Harrington? Know him? I raised him. The woman extended her hand. Eleanor Harrington, James's mother. Diane nearly choked on her breath. Mrs. Harrington, I had no idea you would be here. Eleanor waved dismissively. James doesn't know either. I keep a season ticket in the next section over. Been coming to Sox games for 40 years through thick and thin. When James mentioned he'd given tickets to a nursing student and her baseball-loving son, I was curious. She winked at Tommy. Wanted to see who caught my son's attention. Tommy, oblivious to the undertones of the conversation, launched into an enthusiastic recounting of his birthday party. Eleanor listened with genuine interest, her shrewd eyes occasionally darting to Diane's increasingly uncomfortable expression. When Tommy dashed off to buy a foam finger from a passing vendor with carefully counted money from his own allowance, Eleanor turned to Diane. He's overstepping, isn't he? My son. Diane hesitated. I am incredibly grateful for the opportunities Mr. Harrington has provided. The scholarship will change our lives, but? Eleanor prompted. I can't help wondering why us? Why me? It feels personal in a way that makes me uneasy. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. James lost his father when he was 6. I worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. No time for baseball games then, she added with a touch of sadness. He built his empire from nothing. But success came at a cost. He's brilliant with technology, hopeless with people, especially since the divorce. Diane hadn't known he was divorced. The revelation somehow made him more human. less the infallible benefactor. When he called me about your situation, it was the first time in years I'd heard genuine emotion in his voice. Eleanor continued, whatever his reasons, they're sincere. But she fixed Diane with a penetrating look. You're right to maintain boundaries. Kindness shouldn't create obligation. Before Diane could respond, Tommy returned proudly, sporting his new foam finger. The conversation shifted back to baseball, but Eleanor's words lingered in Diane's mind throughout the evening. After the game, a thrilling Red Sox victory, they were escorted to a waiting car by James's personal driver, Robert, a grandfatherly man who had charmed Tommy with baseball trivia during their drive to Fenway. Did you enjoy the game, young man? Robert asked as he held the car door open. Best day ever, Tommy declared. Then, with childish directness, is Mr. James coming to see us? Robert glanced briefly at Diane. Mr. Harrington is currently in California on business. Oh. Tommy's disappointment was palpable. I wanted to thank him and tell him about the home run. I'm sure he would like to hear about it, Robert replied diplomatically. Perhaps you could write him a letter. The suggestion brightened Tommy's mood, and he spent the ride home planning what he would write. Diane remained quiet, processing the unexpected meeting with Eleanor and the complex emotions it had stirred. Later that week, Diane began her first classes in the nursing program. The rigorous schedule, combined with her continued work at the hospital, left little time for overthinking the Harrington situation. She threw herself into her studies with determination, grateful for the opportunity regardless of its unusual origins. Nearly a month passed without any direct contact from James, though the foundation staff checked in regularly to ensure the scholarship program was meeting her needs. Tommy faithfully sent handwritten letters after each Red Sox game they attended, addressing them to Mr. James at the foundation offices. Whether they reached him, Diane couldn't say. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Diane entered the hospital break room to find her CO workers gathered around the television, expressions rapt. What's going on? She asked, setting down her lunch bag. Harrington's new healthcare initiative, answered Dr. Winters, gesturing to the screen where James was conducting a press conference. He's just pledged $50 million to improve rural and underserved hospitals nationwide. Diane moved closer to the television, studying the man who had so dramatically altered her family's trajectory. On screen, James appeared every inch the polished tech mogul, articulate and confident. Yet Diane noticed something his other audience might miss, a subtle tension in his shoulders, a hint of discomfort behind his media smile. The Harrington Second Chance initiative will focus on both infrastructure improvements and personnel development, James was explaining. We've already piloted a nursing scholarship program that's showing promising results. A reporter raised a hand. Mr. Harrington, this represents a significant shift in your foundation's focus. What inspired this change? For a brief moment, James's composure faltered. Sometimes we need reminders of what truly matters. Healthcare isn't just about technology. It's about people who make hard choices, who sacrifice daily to care for others. His gaze seemed to look beyond the press corps, as if seeing something or someone else entirely. This initiative honors my mother, who worked as a hospital aide while raising me, and every parent who has ever stood at a counter making impossible choices between necessities and small joys. Diane felt her cheeks warm as several co-workers turned toward her, the connection suddenly obvious to those who knew her story. He's talking about you, whispered Nancy from radiology. You're the inspiration for a $50 million initiative. Overwhelmed, Diane slipped out of the break room, seeking refuge in a quiet corridor. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I hope I didn't overstep by mentioning the scholarship program. Your privacy remains paramount. J.H. How had he gotten her number? The foundation paperwork, of course. Diane hesitated before responding. The initiative sounds wonderful. Many families will benefit. Tommy and I enjoyed the Red Sox games, especially meeting your mother. The response came immediately. My mother, Eleanor, was there. She introduced herself. Lovely woman. There was a longer pause before. She's always been my best advisor and worst meddler. I apologize if she said anything inappropriate. Diane smiled despite herself. She said, You're brilliant with technology. Hopeless with people. Accurate assessment. May I call you? There's something I'd like to discuss regarding the foundation. Diane's thumb hovered over the phone. A boundary was being crossed, yet she found herself surprisingly comfortable with the shift. I'm at work until 6 o'clock. After Tommy's bedtime at 8:30 would be best. That evening, after tucking in an exhausted Tommy, Diane sat at her small kitchen table, nervously awaiting James's call. When her phone rang precisely at 8:30, she took a deep breath before answering. "Mrs. Miller, thank you for taking my call. It's MS, and please call me Diane." "Diane, then. I'm James, not Mr. Harrington," he replied, a smile evident in his voice. "I wanted to discuss expanding the scholarship program based on your experience so far. Your feedback would be invaluable." For the next hour, they talked about the practical challenges of pursuing education while parenting alone. Diane found herself speaking candidly about childcare difficulties, scheduling conflicts, and the emotional toll of divided attention. James listened intently, asking thoughtful questions without the condescension she might have expected from someone in his position. "You should be consulting with education experts," Diane said finally. "Not a nursing student who's only been in the program for a few weeks. Experts provide theory. You provide reality," James replied. "That's far more valuable." Their conversation shifted gradually from the scholarship program to more personal topics. Tommy's baseball aspirations, James's latest tech project, books they'd both enjoyed. By the call's end, Diane realized with surprise that nearly 3 hours had passed and that she had laughed more than she had in months. "I'd like to continue this conversation," James said as they prepared to hang up. "Perhaps in person, if you're comfortable with that. Purely professional, of course," he added hastily. "The foundation could benefit enormously from your ongoing input." Diane hesitated, aware of crossing into unfamiliar territory. "I'd be happy to help with the foundation," she said carefully. "For Tommy's sake as much as others. Every child deserves a birthday cake." Autumn painted Riverdale in brilliant hues of red and gold as September gave way to October. In the 6 months since Tommy's birthday, life had transformed for the Millers in ways Diane could never have imagined. Her nursing program was challenging but rewarding. Tommy was thriving in a new after-school program sponsored by the Harrington Foundation, and their financial situation, while still requiring careful management, no longer teetered on the edge of crisis. What had begun as a purely professional relationship with James Harrington had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. Their first in-person meeting after the phone call, coffee at a quiet cafe to discuss scholarship program improvements, had led to dinner the following week to continue the conversation. That dinner had somehow turned into a regular occurrence, with James making the 2-hour drive from Boston whenever his schedule permitted. "Mom, is Mr. James coming tonight?" Tommy asked, looking up from his homework at the kitchen table. The question carried no judgment, just curiosity mingled with hope. Over the months, James had become a fixture in their lives, bringing a stability that had been missing since Tommy's father departed. "Yes, he's joining us for dinner," Diane replied, checking the lasagna in the oven. "He mentioned bringing those astronomy books you were talking about last time." Tommy's face lit up. "Awesome. I need them for my science project. Do you think he'd help me build the solar system model, too?" "You can ask him yourself," she answered, trying to keep her tone casual despite the flutter in her stomach. These dinner visits had become the highlight of her week, a fact that both thrilled and terrified her. James arrived precisely at 6, carrying not only the promised astronomy books, but also a small telescope. The books explain the concepts, but nothing beats seeing the real thing, he explained, as Tommy launched himself into an enthusiastic greeting. Watching them interact, James patiently answering Tommy's rapid-fire questions about Jupiter's moons, Diane felt a complicated warmth spread through her chest. For a man who claimed to be hopeless with people, James had shown a remarkable gift for connecting with her son. There was no condescension, no performance in his attention, just genuine interest. Later, after Tommy had reluctantly gone to bed, extracting a promise from James to set up the telescope that weekend, Diane and James settled on the small balcony of her apartment, mugs of tea in hand. "The foundation board approved all your suggested changes to the scholarship program," James said, his voice quiet in the evening stillness. "The child care stipend increase, the mentorship network, the emergency fund for unexpected expenses, everything. We're expanding to 5 more hospitals next month." Diane nodded, pride mingling with a touch of sadness. "That's wonderful. Those changes will make such a difference, but, James prompted, attuned now to the nuances of her tone. She hesitated. I'm just realizing that as the program expands, you won't need my input as much. These dinners, these conversations, they'll naturally come to an end. James set down his mug, turning to face her directly. Is that what you think this is? A consulting relationship? Isn't it? At least that's how it started. Diane. His voice had a gentle intensity that made her meet his eyes. I drive 2 hours each way, multiple times a week, to see you and Tommy. I've rescheduled board meetings, delegated critical projects, and turned down speaking engagements worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, all to eat lasagna at your kitchen table and help an 8-year-old with his homework. Her breath caught. Why? Because this, he gestured between them, is the first real thing I've felt in years, maybe ever. The silence between them hummed with possibility, with unspoken fears and hopes. Diane had been hurt before, had learned the hard way that fairy tales rarely came true for single mothers working paycheck to paycheck. Yet here was James Harrington, billionaire, tech genius, increasingly the man she thought about first thing each morning, saying words she'd stopped believing she would ever hear again. I'm scared, she admitted finally. Not just for me, but for Tommy. He's already so attached to you. If this doesn't work... I understand the stakes, James said softly. I've never been a father figure before, never wanted to be, truthfully, until I met Tommy, until I met you. Their conversation was interrupted by Diane's phone ringing, the hospital calling her in for an emergency shift, reality reasserting itself as it always did. As James prepared to leave, he paused at the door. Think about what I said. We can take this as slowly as you need. Diane nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the possibilities stretching before her. I will. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of activity. Midterm exams consumed Diane's study time, while James faced a crisis at his company that required his presence in California. They spoke daily by phone, but 2 weeks passed without seeing each other in person, the longest separation since their dinners had begun. Tommy grew increasingly worried as the days passed without a visit from Mr. James. Is he not coming back? He asked one evening, his voice small. Dad said he'd come back too, but he didn't. The question pierced Diane's heart. This is different, honey. James is just very busy with work right now. He called yesterday, remember? Asked all about your science project. Tommy nodded, unconvinced. But what if he forgets about us? He has a big, important company and fancy cars and probably lots of friends who are rich like him. The child's insecurity mirrored her own unspoken fears. What place could she and Tommy possibly have in James Harrington's world? Despite his assurances, despite the genuine connection they'd formed, the gulf between their lives remained vast. That weekend, as Diane helped Tommy with his solar system model, her phone chimed with a text from James, emergency resolved. Back in Boston. May I see you both tomorrow? I've missed you more than I can say. Just as she was about to reply, there was a knock at the apartment door. Opening it revealed Eleanor Harrington, James's mother, holding a bakery box from Sweeties. Eleanor, this is unexpected, Diane said, recovering from her surprise. Good unexpected, I hope, the older woman replied with a smile. Nancy mentioned you'd been working double shifts this week. Thought you and Tommy might appreciate some of her cinnamon rolls. Diane welcomed her in, introducing Tommy, who was initially shy but quickly warmed up when Eleanor showed interest in his half-completed solar system. James was obsessed with space at your age, Eleanor told him. Built a rocket in our backyard when he was 10. Nearly set the neighbor's tree on fire during the launch. Tommy giggled, delighted by this glimpse of his hero's childhood mishaps. While Tommy returned to painting his planets, Eleanor turned to Diane with characteristic directness. He's miserable without you, you know. Diane busied herself with making coffee. We've both been busy. His company needed him in California. The company always needs him. That's the excuse he's used for years to avoid real connection. Eleanor accepted the coffee mug with a nod of thanks. What you may not realize is that this is the first time he's ever resented work keeping him from someone. Diane didn't know how to respond. Her feelings for James had deepened into something profound, something she hadn't dared name even to herself. Eleanor continued, her voice softening. When my husband died, I thought I'd never find love again. Too busy, too many responsibilities, too many risks. It took me 12 years to realize those were excuses born of fear. And did you find love again? Eleanor's eyes twinkled. Robert and I have been married for 26 years now. Robert, your driver, Robert. James's driver now, my husband. Eleanor laughed at Diane's expression. Life offers second chances in the most unexpected packages. The question is whether we're brave enough to accept them. After Eleanor left, Diane sat on the balcony long into the evening, contemplating second chances and unexpected packages. When her phone rang just after 9, she wasn't surprised to see James's name. "I'm back," he said without preamble. "Mother mentioned she visited you today. I hope she behaved herself." Diane smiled. She brought cinnamon rolls and embarrassing childhood stories. Tommy was thrilled. "And you? Were you thrilled to hear about my pyrotechnic failures? I was glad to know you weren't always perfect." There was a pause. "I've never been perfect, Diane. But these past months with you and Tommy, I've been better, happier, more myself than I've ever been." The vulnerability in his voice gave her courage. "We've missed you, both of us." "I've been thinking," James said carefully. "The foundation is opening a new office in Riverdale to manage the expanding scholarship program. It would make sense for me to spend more time there, to be closer to the project." "The project," Diane repeated, a smile in her voice. "And to you," he admitted, "if that's what you want too." 6 months after a canceled birthday cake had brought them together, James and Diane sat side by side on the bleachers at Tommy's baseball field, watching him practice with his team. The evening was cool, autumn giving way to winter's approach. "He's getting better," James observed as Tommy connected with the ball, sending it sailing over second base. "The coaching helps, and the practice field you funded for the league." James shrugged off her gratitude, as he always did. Small investment, significant returns, the Harrington way. Diane turned to study his profile in the fading light. "Is that how you see us? An investment?" He met her gaze, his expression serious. "The best I've ever made, but not in the way you mean." He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "You and Tommy showed me what I'd been missing while building my empire, purpose, connection, joy in simple things." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Tommy run bases with his teammates. The past 6 months had brought challenges as they navigated their evolving relationship, balancing Diane's fierce independence with James's instinct to solve problems with money, integrating their vastly different worlds, building Tommy's trust that this new family configuration would last. "I have something for you," James said suddenly, reaching into his jacket pocket. "Not what you might think," he added quickly, noting her expression. "That conversation is for later, when you're ready." He handed her an envelope. Inside, Diane found the deed to a modest house a few blocks from her apartment, close to Tommy's school, the hospital, and the park where he played baseball. "James, I can't accept this." "It's not a gift," he corrected gently. "It's an investment property owned by the foundation, designated as housing for scholarship recipients. You'd be the program administrator, living on site to mentor future students. Salary commensurate with the position, of course." Diane narrowed her eyes. "You created an entire housing program just to give me a house without making me feel like a charity case." James had the grace to look slightly abashed. "The program is legitimate. We've been planning it for months. Your advisorship has been invaluable, and the house just happens to have 3 bedrooms, a home office, and a backyard perfect for a telescope. Functional requirements for the program administrator," he replied with mock seriousness before his expression softened. "I want to give you and Tommy the world, Diane. But I'm learning that what matters most is being part of that world with you, however you'll have me." As Tommy jogged toward them, face flushed with exercise and happiness, Diane made her decision. The path forward wasn't without complications, but some journeys were worth every challenging step. "We accept," she said, squeezing James's hand, "the position and everything that comes with it." Tommy reached them, breathless with excitement. "Did you see